Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today I'm really excited because we are finishing our How to Build a Small Block Chevy video series. Our small block Chevy happens to be a 383 stroker, which we took from a 350 to a 383 stroker. Now this video series applies to all the first gen small blocks ever made. So if you have a small block, this video series is for you. My goal with this video series was to take an old junkyard engine and turn it into something street strip, something you could put in a hot rod and have fun. This is gonna be as accessible as possible so it can help as many people as possible. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and thank our amazing sponsor, Summit Racing. Summit Racing has now built 5 whole engines with us. They've been an amazing sponsor, but before they were my sponsor, they were also my go-to place on the internet to get speed parts because they have awesome customer support, incredible returns, and the best selection on the internet. So make sure you get all your speed parts from summitracing.com. So today we're putting the final touches on things. We're gonna be putting on our fuel solution. We're gonna be putting on our plug wires, our distributor, and our water pump. Basically, we're buttoning it up so it can either go into a car or truck, or in our case, going to the dynamometer. So we can find out just how much power this bad boy makes. So if you build your engine exactly like we did, you'll have a blueprint for however much horsepower this thing will make. With all that out of the way, let's jump in one last time. The next thing we're gonna put on is our water pump. Now our water pump is an electric unit. This isn't typically done on a street application, but since this engine's going to the dyno, I thought it'd be appropriate. If you have a stock water pump, the process is exactly the same. It'll just have, you know, a pulley on it and it'll look a lot more conventional, but this was sent over by our friends at Summit Racing and the part number is located down below in the description. I've used these before and I really like them. So what we're gonna do to kind of prep it for water is we're gonna take our good friend RTV, just put a dab on the end of your finger and just go around the water holes. Just a skin. It doesn't need to be anything like huge, like a big bead or something. Around just like that. Very good. Then we can take our gaskets, which were included with our water pump, and just place them, kind of squish them down like this. And what that's going to do is that's going to hold them in place for us for when we put it on our engine. And then we're going to repeat our process on the gasket side, because I like that kind of insurance. I know a lot of people question why I put RTV on a gasket. People often cite that the gasket is there for that reason, and I agree. If you want to do that, don't bother putting RTV on it. That's fine. I just like doing the RTV because it's extra insurance, and it only takes you a couple more minutes, and I've always had really good luck doing it. So we all have our different experiences. We all have our different preferences, and that's fine. This just happens to be mine. There we go, line it back up on the bolt holes, and we're ready to go to the engine. So with our water pump kit, it also came with this plug I already have previously installed. I installed it just like a regular freeze plug or something like that. That does go into water. Not all small blocks have that. A lot of the time, this is just blank, and sometimes water pumps actually will incorporate that little bypass. Ours doesn't, so we have our plug. So that's another thing you kind of have to pay attention to on small block Chevys. So now we can line up our water pump and start threading in our fasteners. I'm just gonna get them kind of close, but still kind of loose before I grab the other ones. And then I'm gonna start my bottom left fastener and make sure the gasket is fully in its home, like in its place. And I'm not gonna tighten it all the way to completion just yet. You also might notice that I do not have this fastener in the bottom right one on your screen, and that's because it needs some RTV. It does go into water. So just put a little bit of RTV on the end of your bolt. You can even spread it around a little bit so it looks something like this. And then we can just start that. And no, the RTV is not optional on the bottom right fastener. And we can start just kind of tightening it down. Just go in an X pattern. I would just kind of start in the top right and then the bottom left. And then go up. And then go down to the right. So now I have my torque wrench, and the torque specification is 30 foot-pounds. So I'm just gonna kind of start in the top right. And my torque wrench hasn't gone off yet. I'm actually gonna break it up into a little bit of stages. Nothing like crazy scientific about it. There's 30. 30, go across, 30, and 30. And our water pump is installed. So next we can put on our water neck. Now I'm not gonna run a thermostat because this is going to the dynamometer and they don't want a thermostat in there. But if you're putting this in basically anything else except for a race car, you're gonna put a thermostat in so you have a heater that works nice. Also, I have this awesome billet water neck from Summit Racing and the link is located down below in the description. You want this because, check it out, it swivels. It can go any direction you like. So if you have an oddball fit and the radiator inlet neck is on one side or the other, you're not really sure, and you're building the engine and then you're getting the car, this is a great option for you because you can clock it any which way you like. Now, as far as a gasket go, it doesn't really have one. It has this O-ring it came with, and I've already applied a bunch of WD-40 to it, because you never put on O-rings dry. That looks awesome. And then we just make sure that the O-ring is happy as we plonk her down, just like that. And then I'm just gonna kind of put it at the traditional Chevy angle, just about there. And maybe a little bit more. Maybe like that. Yeah, all right. And then we can start our bolts here. Came with the water neck. Now the torque specification is different depending on what your intake manifold is actually made out of. Mine's made out of aluminum, so it is 15 foot-pounds. If you have a cast iron intake manifold, it is 30 foot-pounds, 30. So I'm gonna go ahead and set my torque wrench up. And then also I'm gonna break up the tightening. So my torque wrench hasn't gone off yet. So I'm just kind of doing a couple turns and switching sides and doing a couple turns. So that way the water neck sits down flat. There's 15. And there you go, 15 installed. So the next thing we're going to do is worry about our dipstick tube. Ours happens to be on the passenger side of the engine. Sometimes they're on the driver's side, so just kind of take a look at what you have. I have this dip tube from Summit Racing sent over by them, and the link is located down below in the description. I've also put a decent amount of RTV on the part that actually goes into the block because these do like to leak, and I don't want to clean up oil later. So we can just kind of get it started and grab a plastic hammer. Give it some taps, kind of guide it in its home until it lines up with the bolt hole. Ooh, I think that's gonna go. Let's see. Oh yeah. That looks pretty good. Then I have a 1/2-inch socket. We're just gonna wind that in. I have a washer and a lock washer on there too, so I never have to worry about it backing out, because these engines are pretty rumbly. I don't really have a torque spec for you, just, you know, about that tight. If I had to say maybe 20 foot-pounds, it's not super tight. And then we're gonna go ahead and put our dipstick all the way in. Nice and installed, looks very hot rod, I love it. So the next thing we're gonna do is drop our distributor in, but before we do that, we need to make sure that the engine is on top dead center on number 1 on the compression stroke. And how do you do that? Really, really simple. So all you need to do is have a turning implement on the front of the engine, just like I have here with this ratchet. And then on the number 1 spark plug well, just place your finger over it and feel a puff of air as it goes down. So right now it's sucking in. There we go. So we know that it's coming up on compression. You can feel that blow off of air kind of push your finger out of the way. Don't worry, it won't hurt you or anything. And then we can stare at our timing pointer. So now that we know we're coming up on the compression stroke for the number 1 cylinder, we know that top dead center is coming up. So what we can do is rotate our engine over. As you can see all our fancy numbers here. And just leave that on 0. So the pointer and the 0 line totally up. I know it looks a little bit off because of the angle the camera's at, but trust me, looking at this angle, it is right on the money. So what I have here is my HEI distributor made by Summit Racing and sent over by them. This is a really awesome unit because it has the coil built in, and GM moved to this somewhere in the 80s, I believe, and it has been the hot rod go-to trick for decades and decades, and I implore you to get one of these and not go with the old school style, because this is one wire ignition and it's ready to go. It's going to be high performance. You can adjust the timing, you can adjust the advancement curve. There's a lot of customization along with one of these, so I definitely recommend it. So what we're interested in is the number 1 cylinder on our ignition. So the rotor goes round and round on top of the HEI, and you have 8 posts that correspond with your cylinders, and we need to find out which number 1 is. And I just happen to know from experience that GM puts the number 1 right here, and so we need to mark that on the body of our distributor because we need to take the cap completely off in order to drop it down into the engine. So you want to have this nice black mark where the number 1 is going to be, and I'll show you why that is. And I've already lubricated our gear. It needs to be nice and sauced up just like this using your engine assembly grease. Also, I wanted to point out that I have my gasket. It doesn't need to be sealed with RTV or any kind of sealant like that because it's 2 machine surfaces, so a gasket will be just as fine as long as it sits just like that on the engine. So let's head over there. Now we're ready to drop our distributor in, and you might notice that my rotor here is back a few degrees, about maybe that much, because as we plonk it in, the rotor is going to interact with the helical gear on the cam, and it's going to do this, and hopefully this electrode and this black mark match up when we drop it in. So we'll just back that off a little bit, about that much. Now pay attention to the orientation of the drive tank for the oil pump because that's going to fight you trying to go in. What I like to do is just kind of eyeball it, just look down at it like this, and then try to match that angle up. Using a long standard screwdriver, just look down in there and just kind of match it up. This is honestly the easiest way I have found. Sometimes you can kind of plunk it around and go around in a circle and line up, but I think this is easier. And once you think it's gonna line up, try dropping it in. And be gentle. So now we can see as I plonked it in, the electrode piece is lined up with this black mark, which is pointed at our number 1 cylinder. That is absolutely perfect. And then we can put on our hold down. This is made by ICT Billet. It is a really sweet piece. You can just use your old one if you have it. And I noticed that our intake manifold actually has 2 spots for a hold down. So it has one on the driver and one on the passenger. I'm using the one on the driver because it's a little easier to get to when everything's in place. There we go, looks pretty good. Make sure it's totally concentric with the distributor. And we can just snug it down a little bit. Awesome. So now what I want you to pay attention to is the rotor where the electrode is actually pointing still at number 1. And what we're gonna do is take the body of the distributor and advance it about 8 degrees, which is about maybe that much. And the reason we're doing this is so that way we know it'll fire up and start right away so we can break our cam in. We don't want it to have trouble running. And then our final advancement will come when we have a timing light on it and the engine is running. And so what we're gonna do is tighten it down a little bit so that way it doesn't get bumped during transit, and you can't just grab this and go wee with it. So we want that nice and secure so when it starts up, we don't have any problems, and that is looking excellent. So now what we can do is put our cap on, and you'll pay attention to this little peg right here, and it goes into this slot, and that's the orientation the cap goes on the distributor. So what we're gonna do is make sure that legs are out of the way, and then you just kind of drop it on like that, making sure that you can't rotate it. So that way you know it's not just gonna spin on it. And then what we can do is take a standard screwdriver and just put the legs underneath the distributor itself. So that way it'll be ready to run. And then don't forget to plug your distributor into your coil. It's pretty easy or else the car won't work. And then what makes these really cool in my opinion is they have battery and tack right here. So you just feed it 12-volt switched power off the key and it'll start the engine. And if you need a tachometer for your computer or a gauge, you have the output right here. And it's just a standard GM signal. It is really, really cool. Now it's time to put in our spark plugs. I have these auto light plugs sent over by our friends at Summit Racing, and the link is down below in the description. What I like to do with a gloved hand is run your fingers over the porcelain and kind of feel for any kind of crack or groove, because if there's a crack or something wrong with this white porcelain, it's not gonna work. So don't even bother putting it in. And then I've also put some anti-seize on the threads here, and I'm just gonna get them started by hand. I like to make sure I have it in by hand, so just to make sure that it is not cross-threaded. And then we can take a 5/8 spark plug socket, and we're just going to set it down. And I'm just gonna put it right down to touch for right now, and then I'm going to get my torque wrench. So now I can put my torque wrench on. My torque figure today is 15 foot-pounds, and that differs per cylinder head, so you might want to look that information up. A good rule of thumb is for aluminum, 15, cast iron, 25, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my torque wrench on, and be sure that you don't bonk the porcelain because you don't want to crack it. And we can torque that down. Now, before I torque it down, I also want to mention you don't put your spark plugs in before you put your exhaust manifolds on, but since we're going to the dyno, I'm going to show you how to put them on, and I'll take them off later when we go to the dyno. It will prevent dirt and other things getting into the spark plug wells during transportation. There we go, 15. It's not super crazy tight, and go ahead and do that for all 8 cylinders. So go ahead and get your Summit Racing 8.5mm plug wires. These are really cool, sent over by Summit Racing, and the link is located down below in the description. Just make sure you get the HEI ones. Go put some dielectric grease in there, not a whole lot, and plonk that down on the number 1 terminal until it makes that awesome click sound, and we can head over to the spark plug. And then we can do the same treatment to the spark plug boot. I put some grease in there, and then we just push it on, making sure we don't kind of go back and forth, just straight down. There we go. Kind of hard to hear on camera, but it did do a nice little clip. I could feel it in my fingers. And then do the rest of them in the firing order. That's the way I like to do it. You can do it however well you want. As long as your terminals match up to your plugs in its firing order, it's fine. And then how you route this wire is dependent on your taste, preference, and application. I'll show you what mine looks like when it's all done. So as you can see, I've finished routing my spark plug wires. Now this would be different if you had like headers and you had the wires go here and then up, especially on a small block Chevy. But for the dyno, I just wanted them out of the way enough so they don't burn on a header. So I just swept them back like this. And I've also used some zip ties as makeshift wire separators. This is something you can do for basically free. And I definitely recommend it because you want them to be nice and separated. But the other side looks just like this, and I think it looks very snazzy. So right here on our intake manifold, just adjacent to our water neck, we have where I'm going to be putting our temp sender for our gauge or EFI system if you're running it. Now this is a special piece. It is bespoke to the gauge or EFI system you buy. So like if you just have a standard like GM temp sender, you can't just plug that into an EFI system and expect the EFI system to be accurate or to work at all. So you just kind of have to be aware of that. Sometimes you have to run 2 of these, like I do on my Camaro. I have one for the analog gauge and one for the EFI system. This one is just going to be running its EFI system. So I have tape on that, and I'm just going to tighten it down a little bit. Now, don't go crazy on this because you can just crack this really easy. So just give it a little snug like that, and that will be good enough. Now on the other side of the water neck is this threaded hole, and this usually goes to a heater hose fitting that would go to a heater core in like a regular car, regular application, but this is a race engine. If it's going anywhere, it's going to be a race car. They don't have heater cores. So I have this plug with pipe tape. Now normally you would just use a regular fitting with pipe tape, and then you could plumb that into your heater core and you would have nice heated air in the winter. But we don't need that, so I'm just going to plug it up and just, you know, like wrist tight is fine. Again, you don't want to crack this aluminum. And back here is another place that we need a plug because this leads directly into our intake manifold. You should have had tape over this basically since you were building the engine because you don't want anything to drop down in there. It goes directly into cylinders. Consequently, this would be an enormous vacuum leak, so we need to plug that up. Alternatively, this would be an excellent vacuum supply for like an HVAC system or a brake booster, anywhere you would need vacuum. We don't need vacuum because this is going to go to the dyno. It's also going to most likely be in some sort of race application after that. So just put some pipe tape on a fitting or a plug like I have. And again, just wrist tight is perfectly fine, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in our new breather. I have this one. It's pretty cool. It has a Chevy bow tie on it. It's actually from Chevrolet Performance, and the link is located down below in the description. I've also wetted the rubber part with some light engine oil or WD-40. Either one works, and just twist it until it plonks in there. And of course, you got to line up the bow tie with the 383 stroker. Yeah, that looks awesome. Now, before you put on your carburetor or EFI hat, I definitely recommend getting studs, and these are made by ARP, and the link is located down below in the description. And I've also put some red Loctite on there just so when I remove the nuts in the future, invariably, they won't come out of my intake manifold, kind of defeating the purpose of these. So just put them in by hand. There's no like torque spec or anything, and go ahead and do that for all 4. And now it's time to finally remove our tape. It has served us well, but it is time to put our gasket down. This is just a 4150 flange gasket, available basically anywhere, but I've left a link down below in the description just for you. What you use for a carburetor EFI is going to vary on application, but you know what goes great on basically every application is this unit by Summit Racing. It is fuel injection, made absurdly simple, and I've run these before and they're awesome. So I've left a link down below in the description to this exact part. So now what we can do, I know you can only see 3 of the fasteners, we're just going to put the washers that came with our stud kit on the studs. They're not directional, there's no bevel or anything. And then we can start the nuts. And then it's a 1/2 inch wrench, and we're just going to tighten this in an X pattern. I would just do kind of like half a turn on each nut. Just kind of go in an X as best you can. I don't really have a torque spec for you. Wrist tight is perfectly fine. You don't want to go too nuts because you can pull the threads right out of the aluminum. But just do it a few times because that gasket is going to want to swedge out a little bit. And we don't want that. There we go, 3 times around and our EFI hat's installed. Now we need to hook up our PCV valve to our EFI hat. So you can see the connector right here. Just a 3/8 vacuum hose, and no, it doesn't need a hose clamp or anything. Trust me, the vacuum will keep it on. There we go. And there we are. So now we can worry about putting our air cleaner on. So I already have my pre-cut carb stud. It's just 1/4 for this application, but it does vary. And typically you just kind of put them in by hand like that, and it's ready for the air cleaner. So here's a hot rodder tip. Get a 1/4 nut or whatever your stud is, and put it all the way down to where it meets your EFI hat or carb, and then just snug it down a little bit, just like wrist tight, and this will prevent the stud from coming out when you wing nut the air cleaner off in the future in lieu of using Loctite. So typically, the very last step you do, and usually you do this after you run the engine and you're happy with it and ready to take it for its test drive, but obviously we don't have that luxury here on the engine stand, but I'm gonna do it anyway, is putting on our crowning jewel, our air cleaner. And this is just the standard air cleaner, and you can see you might have to rotate it a little bit. With the EFI, it kind of fits a little bit differently than it would with a carburetor. And then we can put our filter material, and this is made by Summit Racing, and it kind of looks like an aftermarket unit, doesn't it? And then our lid, making sure that our stud pokes out just a little bit. We don't want that too tall or else it'll look goofy. And then we can just tighten our wing nut down like this. And that is the very last nut that goes on this engine. Before we get too excited though, it's a good idea to reach down here and actuate your throttle linkage to make sure it doesn't bonk the filter housing. And it doesn't, it's perfectly fine. And we're all done. So that is how to finish your small block Chevy build. It has been such a fun and insightful journey building this small block for you here on YouTube. It'll be here forever. So if you ever want to build your small block Chevy out of an old truck or something like that, you have a blueprint for what you need to do and how to do it. I've shown every single nut, bolt size, technique, and torque spec so you at home can build your very own Chevrolet small block. We've taken a junkyard engine that looked like it should be at the bottom of the ocean and turned it into a really awesome street engine that is going to work for years and make a lot of power. This has been the honor and opportunity of a lifetime. I'm very happy that I get to preserve something that I'm passionate about, which is building engines here on YouTube. So hopefully it inspires you to go out there and build it your own. I implore you, if you have a small block Chevy laying around or in an old truck you need to rebuild or an old car, take it out, rebuild it. Don't be afraid of it. You can do it. I know you can. And if you need any help, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to get to it. Or even better, go to our website, 2carpros.com, and leave a question for absolutely free, and I'll be along shortly to answer it. These moments are always bittersweet because I love doing this. It's what I want to do with my life, and I'm incredibly honored that I get to do it. And now it's over. But the good news is, I know another engine build's coming somewhere in the future. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm sure it's coming. Thank you, Summit Racing, for sponsoring this series. Without them, this would not be happening. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful or interesting at all, please consider becoming a member down below. It's a direct way to help the channel out. Barring that, a subscription, like, and comment go a really long way, and I really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.